Good day everyone. Today, I have a story that I really need you to hear. So please, pull up a chair and pour yourself a nice, hot cuppa. My channel is all about the magic of stories. And I want us to enjoy this incredible one together. It was 5:30 in the morning, when the deepest dark of the night finally begins to fade. In this quiet town, nestled in the misty Dandenong ranges of Victoria, a deep slumber still held its grip. The cold, crisp air stung the lungs, and every breath turned to a white frost before vanishing into the void. But through this pre-dawn silence, where all things seemed to hold their breath, a small shadow was moving. An 8-year-old girl named Lily, wrapped in a faded red jacket, was walking with two powerfully built Australian kelpies, a size that seemed far too much for her small frame. With each step, she seemed to test the coldness of the asphalt beneath her feet. This sight was slowly becoming the town's strange local fixture. Lily's morning walk was like an ancient ritual, one she never missed, not for a single day. And this peculiar scene was met with cold stares from the town's residents, peeking through the gaps in their curtains, or from windowsills with a steaming coffee mug in hand. There she is again, Sharon Mitchell, the wife of local council member Bruce Mitchell, muttered, a deep frown forming on her brow. In her line of sight, Lily just walked on, her eyes fixed straight ahead. Her small profile showed no emotion, not joy, not sadness. It was as if her feelings were carved away behind a hard mask. Only the small hand gripping the leads of the two dogs, Dusty and Bluey, was white, drained of blood. Honestly, where are the parents? Bruce grumbled with a frustrated sigh. Letting a little kid handle dogs that big, it's just not right. His words spoke for many in the town. Rumors began to grow, gathering momentum like a snowball of malice. That poor kid, abandoned by her parents, no discipline at all, she's a menace to the neighborhood. The selfish assumptions of the adults became sharp knives, stabbing into the back of an 8-year-old girl. It wasn't that Lily didn't feel the weight of their stares or the sting of their words. In fact, every single morning, she felt a dull pain, as if their judgment was piercing her skin and gripping her heart directly. The whispers from behind her, the disapproving glances as she passed, all of it pressed down heavily on her small shoulders. She simply pressed her lips together tightly and kept walking, relying on the warmth of her dogs for comfort. Dusty on her left, Bluey on her right, her two loyal knights were her only allies in this world. Her eyes seemed to be gazing somewhere far away, to a place no one in this town knew, beyond the rustling eucalyptus leaves, towards the edge of the sky being painted by the dawn. What could possibly be there? And why must she walk this lonely road, every single morning, in the freezing cold? The secret hidden behind her tightly sealed eyes was a mystery no one was close to solving. Only the sound of Lily's small footsteps echoed emptily on the cold asphalt, before being swallowed by the morning mist. The town's ill will towards Lily grew stronger with each passing day. It surrounded her like an invisible wall, a suffocating pressure that squeezed her young heart. School, that small society of children, was a cruel miniature of the adult world. Classmates who once smiled at her now kept their distance, whispering just loud enough for her to hear. Hey, did you know no one's ever home at Lily's place? Yeah, all she does is look after those dogs. She's a bit weird, isn't she? Recess was always spent alone. She would hug her knees in the corner of the classroom, staring blankly at the clouds drifting past the window. The sounds of happy children playing outside were muffled by the thick glass, as if they belonged to another world entirely. During lunch, or when someone dropped a rubber that rolled near her desk, no one would approach her. Lily was treated as if she didn't exist. Her older brother, Jack, was not oblivious to this change. At 22, he sweated on construction sites as a tradie during the day and worked the night fill shift at the local supermarket. In the few moments he had between jobs, he felt the painful disappearance of his sister's smile. When he returned home, exhausted from work, Lily would already be asleep, her small back curled up in bed. Anything happen at school, Lil? He asked her one evening when he found her still awake. She just gave a weak shake of her head. The deep shadow in her eyes tightened Jack's chest. If only he had more time. If only he had more energy to sit and listen to her. But the reality of keeping them both afloat didn't allow for such luxuries. He could only stroke his sister's head in silence, before forcing his tired body back out the door for his night shift. Only the dogs knew of Lily's true loneliness. When she came home, she would bury her face in Dusty and Bluey's warm, earthy fur and cry without making a sound. Their thick coats were the only things that would quietly absorb her tears. Why is everyone so mean? Why doesn't anyone understand? The unanswered questions settled in her heart like a heavy sadness. Amidst this, a new detail about her strange behavior fueled the residents' suspicions even further. Several people had seen that her morning walk always ended at the entrance to a dark, dense section of the state forest at the edge of town, a place that had long been known as somewhere children should never go alone. Why did she go there every morning? What on earth was she doing? This fact sparked new, fearful speculation. Lily's small figure was no longer just a pity. She was becoming a strange, unsettling presence that threatened the peace of the entire town, and that dark curiosity would soon drive them to an act they could never take back. Lily's mysterious behavior finally pushed the residents past their breaking point. A mix of curiosity, a twisted sense of justice, and a tiny sliver of genuine concern drove them to cross a sacred line. "I really think we need to find out for ourselves," said Brenda, one of the neighbors, "what she's doing out there every morning." Sharon Mitchell and a few other women from the neighborhood watch group quickly agreed. They justified their actions as a community service, a way to ensure the child's safety. As they secretly planned their mission, it was a mission to follow Lily on her private walk, an act that was nothing less than a violation of her privacy. The next morning, the moon still cast a pale light in the sky. The women hid in the shadows of a large gum tree on the corner of the street. Watching Lily's house, their hearts pounded, a strange mix of guilt and excitement coursed through them. Soon, the front door of Lily's house opened quietly, and the familiar figure in the red jacket emerged with her 2 dogs. The task was more nerve-wracking than they had imagined. Lily never once looked back. She just walked her set path with a steady, determined pace. Her unwavering steps suggested she had a clear purpose. The women moved from shadow to shadow, holding their breath as they followed her. In the dim light of dawn, Lily's small back looked bigger, and strangely unapproachable. Leaving her usual route, Lily's steps led her to the edge of town. The houses grew sparse, and the grass on the roadside grew thicker. Soon, the entrance to the gloomy state forest came into view. The trees grew so densely that even during the day, sunlight struggled to reach the ground. The place was wrapped in an eerie silence. The women hid behind a final cluster of bushes, holding their breath as they watched what Lily would do next. Lily stopped right at the entrance of a narrow track leading into the forest. She slowly knelt down and gently stroked the necks of Dusty and Bluey. Her face was not the usual emotionless mask. It looked like she was desperately holding back an unbearable sadness. In the next moment, the women gasped. Lily pulled something from her jacket pocket, clutched it tightly in both hands, and squeezed. Her small shoulders trembled slightly. Here, in a place where she thought no one could see her, she was silently holding back tears. What was she holding? Why did she look so pained in this specific place? The residents' curiosity reached its peak, but the answer remained locked away in the deep silence of the forest. The sight from within the bushes completely overturned all of their assumptions. Lily gently put the object back in her pocket. Then, she turned her gaze towards an old, weathered landmark standing quietly at the entrance to the track. It was a small, simple roadside cross, hammered into the ground. If not for the faded, sun-bleached plastic flowers tied to it, one might mistake it for a simple piece of wood. Lily stood up, walked to the cross, and placed her small hands together. She closed her eyes, her long eyelashes trembling. She looked like a pilgrim praying for something lost. After a long silence that felt like minutes, she bowed her head deeply, then turned and walked away without a word. The women were speechless at the completely unexpected scene. They had imagined something far more sinister, a secret meeting, a delinquent plan, but what unfolded before them was a quiet, solemn, and deeply personal ritual. She was praying, one of them whispered. What on earth could she be praying for? Their minds were now filled with new questions. What did her tears mean? What was the object she was holding? And why did she need to pray at this lonely roadside cross every single day? The mystery, instead of being solved, had deepened into a more complex labyrinth. The answer they had sought, by committing the forbidden act of following her, was not there. All they were left with was a stark, uncomfortable view of the girl's immeasurable loneliness. The story of the prayer spread through town instantly, but it didn't lead to sympathy for Lily. Instead, her existence became even more unsettling and mysterious. She's casting curses on someone in that forest. Maybe she's communicating with ghosts. The town's imagination twisted the girl's quiet prayer into a dark and malicious tale. Amidst this, a new rumor added fuel to the fire of suspicion. There were sightings of a young man, looking completely exhausted, coming and going from Lily's house late at night. It was, of course, her brother Jack, but to the residents who didn't know the situation, it was the perfect seed for gossip. See, it's not a normal family. A young man hanging around, while the child is left to wander alone at that hour. Curiosity had now morphed into a self-righteous sense of justice. Lily's actions, and her family's situation, were all seen as a problem that disrupted the town's order. And that twisted justice finally crossed a line. Someone made an anonymous call to Child Protective Services. A report of suspected neglect at the Takagi residence. The gears of fate were beginning to turn with a loud, grinding noise. There was no time left. That morning started just like any other. The cold air bit at her skin as Lily walked her usual path with her two dogs. But she had no way of knowing that behind her, the stage was being set to shatter the town's silence. A white sedan carrying officers from Child Protective Services pulled up quietly in front of Lily's house. A small crowd of residents had gathered to see what was happening. Brenda was there. Bruce and Sharon Mitchell were there too. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity, anxiety, and a certain shameful excitement, believing their report was finally bringing the problem to light. An officer knocked on the front door, first gently, then more forcefully, more insistently. There was no answer from inside. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "See, no one's home, probably out with that man." Just as the officer was about to try the doorknob as a last resort, a voice cut through the air. "Can I help you?" Everyone froze and turned. Standing there was a young man, exhausted from a night shift, with deep, dark circles under his eyes. It was Lily's brother, Jack. He was holding a supermarket bag, staring at the scene unfolding before him with a wary expression. "Are you the resident here? We're from Child Protective Services. Here for a welfare check on a minor." Before the officer could finish, the color drained from Jack's face. "A welfare check? My sister?" His mind raced with the worst possible scenarios. "Lily? Has something happened to Lily?" His desperate cry echoed through the quiet suburban street. His voice contained nothing but pure, genuine fear for his sister. The residents were momentarily stunned by his frantic reaction. This was not the irresponsible young man they had imagined. The officer tried to calmly explain the situation, but Jack's panic didn't subside. "She's just out walking the dogs. She left at the usual time." As he said this, his eyes caught sight of a small figure in a red jacket walking towards them from a distance. It was Lily. She too had noticed the commotion in front of her house and had stopped, her face filled with anxiety. Jack ran to her, pulling his sister's small body into a tight hug. Seeing this, the residents finally began to realize the magnitude of their mistake. This was not the story of an immoral, neglectful family they had created in their minds. They had misunderstood something, fundamentally. One of the officers turned to the crowd of residents. He spoke quietly, but with absolute clarity. His words were a brutal sentence that would shatter their self-righteousness to pieces. The report mentioned neglect. However, according to our preliminary investigation, the parents of the children in this house, Mr. and Mrs. Takagi, were both killed in a car accident 1 year ago. The air turned to ice. It felt as if time itself had stopped. In the crushing silence, the officer's words echoed with the weight of a death sentence. Parents died a year ago. The fact hit the residents' minds like a sledgehammer. Everyone felt the blood drain from their faces. Brenda covered her mouth with both hands. Bruce Mitchell just stood there, stunned. Every malicious word they had spoken, every cold stare they had given, now returned to them like sharp blades, piercing their own hearts. They could barely register the rest of the conversation between the officer and Jack. In their minds, their own foolish words and actions were flashing before their eyes like a horrifying film. Abandoned by her parents, no discipline. How deeply had they wounded these young siblings, who had only just lost their parents, with those cruel words? Eventually, the officers gave Jack a deep nod and quietly returned to their car. The storm had passed, but what remained was an awkward silence and an irreversible guilt that hung in the air like lead. Jack, without a word, took Lily's hand and started to walk towards the house. As he did, someone in the crowd called out in a thin voice, Jack turned around slowly. His eyes held no contempt, no anger, just a bottomless exhaustion and a deep disillusionment with humanity. "Her morning walk," he said, his voice raspy, as if squeezing the words out. "It's not because she's scared of being home alone while I'm on my night shift. She's just keeping a promise she made to our mum and dad. The last thing they did was buy these two dogs. She promised she'd take good care of them. That's all it is." The words mercilessly tore through the residents' hearts. Lily's mysterious ritual was not a curse or a misdeed. It was the sacred prayer of an 8-year-old girl, desperately trying to hold on to the bond with her lost parents. "We are so sorry," Bruce finally managed to say, bowing his head low. Following his lead, the other residents bowed their heads one by one. But the apology was far too late. Jack gave them a cold glance and said quietly, "Just leave us alone, we'll manage by ourselves." His voice was soft, but it carried a stronger ejection than any shout could have. The front door shut with a solid thud. That door seemed to symbolize the tightly closed hearts of the two siblings. The residents could only stand there, frozen in front of it. They had finally understood the weight of their sin. They realized how their irresponsible gossip, their violence disguised as curiosity, had pushed these grieving children to the brink, cornering them in a dark and lonely place. An unforgivable guilt began to seep into their hearts, cold and persistent in the morning air. After learning the truth, the residents' hearts swung violently towards guilt and pity. As if to atone for their mistake, they began to direct an excessive, overbearing kindness towards the siblings. But this one-sided sympathy only made the situation worse. "Jack, Lily, we made a casserole, please have some. Lily dear, here are some lamingtons. If you ever need anything, just let us know, all right?" A rotating cast of neighbors started visiting their front door, leaving food and other offerings. They all wore faces full of concern and pity. But for Jack and Lily, those looks were an unbearable torment. The same people who had viewed them as a nuisance yesterday were now looking at them as poor, tragic children. Those stares tore their pride to shreds. Jack politely but firmly refused the offerings. "We appreciate the thought, really, but we're fine on our own." To the residents, his attitude seemed stubborn and ungrateful. They couldn't understand why their goodwill was being rejected. The change in Lily was especially noticeable. She retreated even further into her shell. The looks of pity from the residents were worse than their previous scorn. It was a constant reminder that she wasn't normal. She started staying inside the house more and more, and even her beloved walks with the dogs were shifted to an even earlier time, before the sun rose, to avoid seeing anyone. Seeing this, the residents grew even more concerned. "That poor girl, she must be emotionally unstable. We need to get more involved." Their goodwill backfired, turning into a self-righteous, meddling interference. They didn't realize they were trying to pry open the doors to the siblings' hearts by force. Among them, there was one man watching from a different perspective, a retired schoolteacher named Arthur Evans. He had been quietly observing the whole situation unfold. He knew that a wounded heart doesn't need pushy sympathy. It needs someone to sit quietly alongside it, patiently waiting for it to open on its own. Mr. Evans didn't visit their house like the others. Instead, he made a decision. If there was any way to break this awkward, twisted stalemate, it had to start with approaching Lily's heart with genuine respect. But how? How could he get his words through to an 8-year-old girl who was so deeply hurt and distrustful of adults? Drawing on his decades of experience as a teacher, Mr. Evans began to quietly put his plan into action, waiting for the right moment. As the town continued its misguided attempts at kindness, his quiet determination seemed like the only glimmer of hope. Mr. Evans's actions were incredibly quiet and patient. He decided to start sitting on a park bench along Lily's route. Even earlier than she left for her walk, when the stars were still out, he would just sit there. He never tried to talk to her, never stared. He just looked up at the sky with a calm expression, as if he too was simply enjoying an early morning stroll. The first day, Lily noticed him and immediately became wary. The dogs sensed her tension and let out low growls. Protective of their master, she quickly crossed the street to the other side and hurried past. Mr. Evans didn't watch her go. He just sat there peacefully. The second day, and the third, were the same. Lily completely ignored him, and he remained on his bench. After a week, a tiny change occurred in Lily's behavior. She still crossed the street to avoid him, but as she passed, she glanced over at him for just a second. Her eyes held a small question along with the wariness. What does this man want? Mr. Evans didn't miss that moment. When their eyes met, he didn't force a smile. He simply gave a small, quiet nod. That was it. That subtle greeting sent a small ripple across Lily's heart. He was different from the other adults. She sensed something in his presence that wasn't pity or curiosity, but a quiet respect. Several more days passed. One morning, for the first time, Lily didn't cross to the other side of the road. She walked past, just a few meters from his bench. That's when Mr. Evans spoke for the first time. "Good day, you're up early again." His voice was gentle, with no hidden meaning. Lily stopped in surprise, but was about to start walking again. But Mr. Evans continued with a kind voice. "Those are some magnificent dogs. I can tell you take wonderful care of them every day." Praise for her dogs, for Lily, meant the same as being praised herself. She finally stopped walking and turned back hesitantly. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was as thin as a whisper. It was the first time in a long time she had spoken to an adult in this town. Mr. Evans didn't rush. He continued slowly. "Must be a big job every day. But I suppose you have your reasons." The question gently touched the softest part of her heart. She looked down at the ground in silence for a moment, then looked up, meeting Mr. Evans's eyes directly, and whispered, "It's a promise, an important promise with Mum and Dad." It was a sad confession, but by finally telling someone, It felt as though a heavy lock on Lily's heart had clicked open. Just a little. Mr. Evans didn't ask any more questions. He just nodded deeply. I see. That sounds like a very important promise indeed, was all he said. He would learn the true meaning of those words a little later on. The town's reaction to what Mr. Evans had heard from Lily was mixed. The word promise made their hearts ache with guilt once more. But that emotion would soon lead to a final, decisive break with Jack. If Lily is starting to open up, this is our chance to really help. Brenda believed this sincerely, and along with a few other residents, visited their house again. This time, it wasn't with food, but with an offer of a sincere apology and practical support. However, Jack's expression when he met them was even harder and colder than before. What do you want now? His voice was sharp and defensive. Bruce stepped forward on behalf of the group and bowed his head deeply. Jack, mate, we are truly sorry. We had no idea what you two had been carrying, and we hurt you with our irresponsible gossip. Please, let us make it up to you. The town council will promise to provide as much support as we can. The words were meant to be sincere, but they were the trigger that finally unleashed all the anger and despair that had been building up inside Jack. Make it up to us? Support? Are you kidding me? Jack's roar echoed through the quiet afternoon. It was the cry of a soul erupting with every emotion he had been forced to suppress. Do you have any idea how much Lily suffered because of the rumors you all spread for your own entertainment? At school, she was pointed at as the weird orphan girl. She stopped talking to anyone for a while. She started waking up from nightmares, screaming. The doctor said it might be due to extreme stress. Jack's words were like bullets, striking the residents in the chest. It was the first time they were confronted with the reality that their gossip had pushed a young girl's mind to such a dark place. You all just watched from a distance, making up stories to amuse yourselves. You never once thought about what we were going through just to survive each day. Working 2 jobs to pay for our parents' funeral, coming home exhausted but having to put on a smile for Lily. Do you know how hard that was? Jack's words broke, and large tears fell from his eyes. They were the desperate tears of a young man who had been fighting a harsh reality all on his own to protect his little sister. He wiped them away angrily and glared at the residents with eyes full of hatred. What you did wasn't just gossip. It was violence. You murdered a part of her spirit. Don't you ever show your faces here again. The words were a final sentence. Jack slammed the front door with all his might, and the sound of the lock turning from the inside echoed coldly. The residents could only stand there, rooted to the spot. You murdered a part of her spirit. That condemnation was branded onto their conscience, a scar that would never fade. Their shallow goodwill was completely shattered. This was the beginning of a long, difficult road to true atonement. Jack's cry from the heart shook the residents to their core. They could no longer speak of shallow pity or self-satisfying charity. The weight of his words, "You murdered a part of her spirit," became a heavy reality pressing down on their shoulders. The community hall was filled with a heavy silence. "We've done something unforgivable," Bruce said, forcing the words out. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced only by a deep shade of regret. Everyone looked down, contemplating the depth of their sin. Words of apology and offers of support would no longer reach the siblings. What could they do now? That was where the discussion began. If words won't work, then maybe we have to show them with actions, Mr. Evans said. He continued quietly, "We don't know if they will ever forgive us. They might not, but even so, we must continue to show them, quietly and sincerely, through our actions, that we want them to live peacefully in this town. This isn't for our own satisfaction. It's the bare minimum of responsibility for the sin we have committed." At Mr. Evans's words, the residents lifted their heads. In their eyes, a glimmer of resolve had finally appeared. They decided to atone not with words, but with deeds. It was the beginning of a long, quiet journey of redemption, a mission to support the siblings from the shadows, without them even noticing. The next morning, in the dark hours before Lily left for her walk, Bruce Mitchell and several other men gathered in front of the house. In their hands were shovels and garden shears. The garden had become overgrown with weeds, as there was no time or energy to maintain it. Without a sound, exercising the utmost care, they began to silently pull the weeds. It was a strange sight. The very men who once stared at the house with suspicion were now on their knees like penitents, working tirelessly to clean the yard. They didn't exchange words. They only knew how to express their guilt through sweat and dirt. Just before dawn, they finished their work and left as quietly as they had come. When Lily and Jack returned from the walk, they were stunned into silence by the tidy garden. They knew instantly who had done it. But Jack's expression was complicated. More than gratitude, he felt confusion and a lingering distrust. Even so, That quiet act had certainly created a tiny crack in the siblings' tightly sealed hearts. The residents' atonement had only just begun. It was not an act to beg for forgiveness. It was a quiet but unwavering expression of their determination to face their own sins. The residents' wordless support continued every day after that. It was always done at a careful distance, never intruding on the siblings' space, but providing a tangible warmth. After the garden, it was the squeaky front gate. One morning, as Jack was leaving for work, the gate that had always groaned in protest swung open smoothly. He saw that the hinges had been freshly oiled. Another weekend, the peeling paint on an outside wall had been discreetly touched up. Jack noticed every single one of these things, but he couldn't bring himself to feel straightforward gratitude. Inside him, a battle raged between his distrust of the residents and his confusion over their quiet kindness. The stubborn feeling of, "I'll never forgive them," clashed with the faint hope that, maybe they really are sorry. The conflict tormented him. Meanwhile, a small change was also happening in Lily's heart. On her way home from school, she would sometimes find an unmarked paper bag placed gently by her front door. Inside were fresh, juicy tomatoes and cucumbers from someone's garden. And sometimes, simple, homemade biscuits. The attached note just said, "A little extra from our garden," with no name, but Lily somehow knew the round, neat handwriting belonged to Brenda. At first, Lily was wary, but as these quiet gifts continued day after day, she felt her heart slowly softening. It didn't feel like pity, but like the warm gesture of a neighbor. She would show the vegetables to Jack and say, in a bright voice she hadn't used in a long time, "Let's put these in dinner tonight." Then, one day, Jack came home from work to find a note on the kitchen table. It was a piece of paper torn from Lily's school notebook. On it, in a child's clumsy handwriting, were two words, "Thank you." That single phrase quietly broke the dam in Jack's heart. The residents' actions were not just for self-satisfaction. They were slowly, but surely, healing his vulnerable sister's heart. Jack clutched the small note and covered his face. He might not be able to forgive them yet, but he could no longer ignore their sincerity. The next morning, Lily placed that note gently next to the bag of vegetables left at the door. It was the first warm, wordless exchange between the residents and the siblings. It shone like a small sign of spring after a long, hard winter, a quiet but definite beacon of hope. That summer, the region was hit by a heat wave of historic proportions. For days, the air was thick and still, the sun beating down relentlessly. The scent of dry eucalyptus hung heavy, and the distant sound of country fire authority sirens became a regular, ominous soundtrack to their lives. The threat of bushfire was on everyone's mind. Jack and Lily spent an anxious night in their old, wooden house. The structure groaned under the force of a hot, dry northerly wind that howled outside, rattling the windows. Then, late at night, in a particularly violent gust, a sickening crack echoed from the roof. Jack rushed to see what happened. A huge branch from an old gum tree had snapped and crashed down, smashing a section of the roof. The wind now howled through the new hole. It was a disaster. There was no money for repairs. No way he could afford to call a roofer. Was he going to fail to protect this house? To protect his sister? A wave of despair and panic washed over him. Lily stood behind her brother, clutching Dusty and Bluey, her face pale with fear. The long, long night finally passed. The wind had died down, but the damage to their house remained. As Jack opened the front door, feeling completely defeated, an unbelievable sight met his eyes. Standing in front of their house were Bruce Mitchell and at least a dozen other men from the town. Armed with ladders, tools, and chainsaws, they were all dressed in work clothes, their faces grim with determination. While Jack stood there, stunned, Bruce said gruffly, "Your place is the oldest one on the street. Mate, figured you might be in a spot of bother. Couldn't just leave you to it." At those words, the men sprang into action. Without another word, they set up ladders, climbed onto the roof to assess the damage, and started a makeshift repair with a large blue tarp. They worked to carefully remove the broken tiles and cut away the dangerous, splintered remains of the branch. No one said much, they just did what needed to be done. Their coordinated movements were like those of a team of professional tradies who had worked together for years. Jack could only watch. The very people he had hated were now sweating and working desperately for him. Their strong backs seemed to be wordlessly sharing the heavy burden he had been carrying all alone. "Why?" a small voice escaped Jack's lips. Mr. Evans, who had been there organizing things, heard him and came over, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Because you try to do too much on your own, son," he said kindly. "It's all right to lean on us old blokes sometimes." Those words broke the final wall around Jack's heart. Tears streamed down his face. They weren't tears of anger or sadness, but tears of gratitude for the warmth of human connection. He sank to his knees on the lawn and bowed his head low. Over and over, to the men who had come to help. Thank you all so much. The words he managed to choke out, his voice trembling, became the first solid bridge built between the residents and the siblings. After the hot wind passed, a cool change brought gentle rain, washing the dust from the air. The miracle of that morning dramatically changed the relationship between the town and the Takagi siblings. The door to Jack's heart, which he had kept firmly shut, was finally opened. He no longer rejected the residents' kindness. In fact, he started attending the local community meetings, to apologize for his past hostility and to express his profound gratitude. The sight of him brought tears to the eyes of many residents. It was the true start of the town becoming one big family. The support became practical and warm. Knowing Jack's work schedule, the community organized a roster to help with Lily's dinner or to check her homework. At first, Lily was shy, but she slowly began to smile again, enjoying Sharon's delicious homemade stew and the simple paper cranes Brenda's husband taught her to fold. One afternoon, Jack and Lily were invited to Mr. Evans's house. Sitting on his veranda and drinking lemonade, as a peaceful quiet settled over them, Mr. Evans asked the question that had been on his mind for a long time. Jack, if you don't mind me asking, could you tell me about the promise Lily is keeping for your parents? What exactly is it? Jack's eyes gazed into the distance. Then, for the first time, he began to share the truth of that day. Bit by bit, the accident, it happened on a clear autumn day like this. 1 year ago, Mum and Dad were so excited. They were going to take Dusty and Bluey to a new dog park that had just opened up. Jack's voice trembled slightly. Just before they left, Dad said to Lily, "All right, Lil, we're counting on you to look after Dusty and Bluey until we get back. That's your promise to us. Okay?" And Lily, she just grinned and said, "Okay." That was the last thing Dad ever said to her. His parents' car was hit head-on by a driver who lost control on a sharp bend at the edge of town. They were killed instantly. Lily's morning walk, it's not just for exercise. Jack continued, his voice thick with emotion. Every morning, she walks to the little memorial cross just past the crash site. Someone put it up for them. She goes there to report to Mum and Dad. To tell them, I'm still keeping my promise. She hasn't missed a single day. Jack's confession left everyone who heard it breathless. Lily's mysterious prayer at the forest's edge. Her solemn ritual, it was all connected to this heartbreaking story. The weight of the promise that an 8-year-old girl had carried on her own for an entire year was far beyond what any of the adults could have imagined. It was a form of love so fierce and so tragic. Hearing the full story, Brenda broke down in tears. The other residents began to wipe their own eyes. And in that circle of warm, shared tears, Lily, for the first time, looked at them with a smile. It was a shy smile, but it came from the bottom of her heart. It was the moment the ice that had frozen her heart for so long finally melted away completely. With the truth shared, the world surrounding Lily and Jack was transformed into one filled with a gentle light. The townspeople no longer saw them as the poor orphans, but as proud members of a family who had overcome great hardship. Lily's morning walk was no longer a lonely ritual. As she left her front door, someone would call out, "Morning, Lily." On her walk, Bruce, doing his morning stretches in his front yard, would give her a wave. Even the farmer preparing his fields on the way to the memorial would pat her on the head and say, "You're a good kid." Every single one of these warm interactions was like sunlight, warming Lily's heart. Her situation at school changed dramatically too. The change in the town's adults naturally trickled down to the world of the children. Her classmates, now knowing her story, were ashamed of their past behavior and actively started inviting her to play. At first, Lily was hesitant, but she slowly found her place in their games of tag and skipping. The sound of her bright laughter during recess was the melody of rebirth that the entire town had been waiting for. Jack's life also changed significantly. Thanks to the community's support, he was able to cut back on his punishing work schedule and secure more time to spend with his sister. They had dinner together, laughed at the TV, and sometimes had silly arguments. This ordinary, everyday life felt like a lost treasure to him. He no longer had to fight alone. He now had a strong, dependable family standing right behind him. The seasons turned, and summer arrived in the town. Amidst the loud chorus of cicadas, the town decided to hold a small community fete at the local park. Jack and Lily naturally took part in the preparations. The sight of the siblings laughing and working alongside the adults, stringing up lights and helping to set up stalls, was something everyone watched with a warm smile. On the day of the fete, a small stage was set up for community announcements. Everyone in town agreed on who they wanted to hear from. Mr. Evans, with a slightly nervous smile, gently asked Lily, "Lily, is there anything you'd like to say to everyone in our town?" Lily looked down for a moment, thinking. Then, she lifted her head, her eyes filled with determination, and gave a firm nod. It was the moment she decided to use her own words to share everything she had felt over the past year, and her hopes for the future. As the late afternoon sun lit up the small stage, the entire town held its breath, waiting for a little girl to take the microphone. What would she say? No one yet knew that the words from her small lips would mark the beginning of a new chapter in the town's history. The top of the makeshift stage at the fete was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Lily, dressed in a simple summer dress, gripped the microphone with a slightly trembling hand and looked out at the faces of the townspeople spread out below her. She saw Brenda, and Bruce and Sharon, and Mr. Evans, all of them watching her with gentle eyes. After a moment of silence, Lily's clear voice rang out through the speakers, echoing across the festival grounds. "I don't have a mum or a dad, so, for a long time, I thought I was all alone." A hush fell over the crowd at her direct words. "I used to be scared on my morning walk. I was really scared that everyone was watching me." Lily paused, swallowing hard to hold back tears. "But, I'm not scared anymore, because of the day you all fixed our roof. Because of all the yummy dinners you brought us. Because everyone at school started playing with me again. You all became my family. This town is my big, warm family. Thank you so much." With that, Lily bowed her head deeply. In the next instant, a thunderous applause erupted, enveloping the park. It wasn't just applause of praise. It was a sound filled with love, celebrating one little girl's courage and the rebirth of their town. Many residents didn't even try to hide the tears streaming down their cheeks. Clapping on and on, Jack stood near the stage, looking up at his sister with pride, tears silently rolling down his face. The next morning, Lily was walking her usual path with Dusty and Bluey, but her steps were incomparably lighter and stronger than before. There was no shadow of fear or sadness on her face. It was shining with a bright light, full of hope for the future. People she passed all smiled. "Good day, Lily, you were fantastic last night," they would call out. Lily would smile back shyly and reply with a cheerful, "Morning." This was the image of a girl who had overcome her past pain and was completely free. When she arrived at the memorial cross, she put her hands together as always. But her prayer was no longer a sad report. "Mum, Dad, are you watching? I'm okay now. I have such a big family now." It was a promise for the future, full of gratitude and determination. On the way back, the walking path was sparkling, illuminated by the morning sun. From their windows, Brenda and Sharon watched her pass. From his veranda, Mr. Evans watched. From his front door, Bruce watched. They all watched with warm gazes. The shadows cast by Lily and her two dogs stretched out long and straight, pointing towards the future. This path, once filled with cold stares and malice, had now become a path of light, watched over by the kindness and love of an entire town. The story spun by the girl in the red jacket was now deeply etched into the hearts of the people. A story that would be told in this town forever. It was a story of hope, of rising from the depths of despair, and forging a future with the power of love.